missing a feeling.
Well, hello. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Tara Martini, along with Becky McNattin. We are glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health.
What an amazing show we have today, Tara.
Oh, we do.
Last week, we spent time talking about trauma and how trauma may impact our lives physically. Talked a lot about that. Psychologically, relationally, emotionally. This week, we have our special guests, Amanda Sullivan and Amy Gold, back on the show to talk through treatment and processing of trauma. So beyond what trauma is, but how do we process it? Welcome, Amy and Amanda. We're glad to have you back again this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we were strategic in having the four of us together today because each of us is trained in a different trauma modality. I'm trained in narrative exposure and written exposure therapies. Tara, you're trained in brain spotting. Amy is trained in accelerated resolution therapy, and Amanda is trained in somatic therapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Kind of a tongue twister.
Yes.
And there are all types of...
times fast.
Yeah, there are all... These are all therapies on working with trauma specifically and experiences that do it all a little differently. And I'm super excited for us to talk together about each of these modalities in depth. There are also a lot of modalities that we're not going to cover today. Different types of trauma processing, but we're focusing on these four. And I would love to hear from each of you, what is trauma therapy? Because you do it every day.
Well, I would say just trauma therapy in general is therapy that takes into mind that trauma is like an experience that people have. It's called trauma informed. So we're kind of holding this that people are experiencing trauma potentially and understanding how it affects their mental health, their nervous system, all these different aspects of their life. But specifically trauma therapies, the ones we're talking about, are interventions that have been like developed or identified to help process and cope with trauma or traumatic events. And they've all been researched and shown to have efficacy in helping reduce symptoms, some of those symptoms that we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah, Amy, what would you say?
Yeah. I mean, it's we're having folks that are coming in with some significant type of trauma, whether it's chronic or one single incident, and we're trying to help them get that distress that they're feeling every day from those experiences to be less. And so it through these different types of modalities.
Right.
Yeah, and these interventions, just to add, often include something besides just our kind of normal talk therapy.
Right.
They're beyond verbal processing. They involve something different.
Good point.
That gets to a different part of how the trauma is affecting kind of that nervous system or brain or body part, creativity, those types of things. So they kind of have that added layer.
Yes. What are your thoughts, Tara?
So yes to all of that, and that I kind of see trauma therapy as the process where it's kind of the pre part, and then the during is the part where I'm using the modality of brain spotting, and then the post. And within the modality of brain spotting, that's where, like Amanda said, yes, we all use talk therapy every day in our offices, but when we're using the modality that we're trained in, that is where talk therapy is amazing, and you can go deep, but it can only get you to a certain point. And then, like with brain spotting, that is where you can go into, and you're working within the inner brain, really getting down into processing that trauma. You can't reach that level with simply talk therapy. And so that is where being trained in things like this is so incredibly helpful to truly be able to help a client with processing their trauma.
Yeah, and I would say trauma therapy is honoring, witnessing, and integrating. Someone should always consider it because that is what we do. Such an important topic here, and we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned as we jump back in and further explore trauma therapy and actually, everyone, what this looks like, what the modalities are. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud. We will be back in just a moment.
You gotta find the people. Express yourself.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Tara Martini with Becky McNattin. Let's dive right back into our discussion on trauma therapies.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to challenge you because there's a question I get often from clients and people in the community when I'm talking to them. And they want to know, are there modalities for trauma treatment that are focused on specific types of trauma? And so what would you all say to that question?
I would say not necessarily. I would say that the modality, in terms of the modalities that we're talking about today, really depend on the person and the type of, like a lot of kind of, I guess, variables in terms of what modality might be a good fit for them. But I think that all of the modalities we're trained in can be a fit for acute trauma, which is like a single event trauma, or chronic trauma, which is more ongoing, or complex trauma.
I think it depends, honestly, more on the individual. And it's so much more on that. For example, most importantly, I think it's the relationship, and we'll talk about that later on. But second, I think it has to do with the client and their capacity and ability to really go deep. If there's someone who really has that wall up and to be able to explore at that level, it isn't going to be effective.
Well, good point, because as unique as every individual is, trauma modalities are unique as well. And so there might be something, not because of the specific type of trauma that you've experienced, but because of the kind of processing you resonate with, who you are as an individual.
Yes.
Good point.
And I think also in that is that age too. So if your early childhood work, if you're a therapist working with early childhood kiddos and doing trauma work, TFCBT trauma focused CBT might be you see those folks lean more on that.
Yes.
Or play therapy or
narrative kind of approach. With the play therapy with it. But we can do TFCBT with adults too, and we can do.
And that's a really good
EMDR
point,
kids.
Amy, because in terms of trauma treatment that are focused on specific types of trauma, it much more is around is this a verbal issue? Does someone not have the ability to cognate? Music therapy and trauma processing that way may be a better fit.
Right.
Yep.
If you have a child on the spectrum with autism,
And certainly if
nonverbal.
people look up these various trauma modalities, you might find that they were originated with specific kinds of trauma.
Right.
The narrative exposure therapy, what I'm trained in, originated in working in refugee camps. So some of the evidence-based information may be around specific types of trauma, but really I hear what everybody is saying, and I think that is widely held. The answer is it depends on who the person is that's coming in and what kind of processing would be helpful for them.
And you make a good point in that. So for brain spotting, some of the first work, it is a newer modality. Some of the first work was done with soldiers coming back from war regarding PTSD. That doesn't mean that the sole work is PTSD with soldiers.
Yes.
It can be used for a variety of reasons we'll get to later. But yes, that was like the birth of it was around that.
And what kinds of fears do you all hear? Fears or apprehensions do you hear from people that are beginning therapy to process trauma?
Well, I think the biggest one is that it's going to make them feel worse than they already do.
Yes.
Yes.
And they're not going to come back from that.
Right.
Having reliving those memories is a scary
That
thought.
the symptoms could get worse that they're experiencing.
And just not wanting to share. I mean, just it's been a secret, maybe.
Shame.
Shame. You don't want to be in a room with somebody talking about that.
Well, and the brain is a powerful thing.
Well, it's there to protect us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it can work for us and against us. And what you're telling someone is you've experienced this deep trauma. Now I want you to go back to it. And they're saying, well, I'm scared I'm not going to be able to get out of it. And then here's this person who's like, well, but I'm asking you to,
Right.
and that's where connection and relationship is so extremely important.
And those grounding techniques.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
All the things. They need to be equipped.
all the things in the beginning to have with that client relationship before you're starting. making sure they're ready. And I know we'll go
Yeah,
on
to
with it.
respond
It's just a huge
with
fear.
Yeah.
love and compassion. And you actually mentioned this in last week's episode, Amanda, love and compassion to fear, responding with that. That is real and true. So talking about those and bringing those up even openly in therapy as part of
Yes.
that is processing your trauma.
Totally.
Talking about it is
Yep.
processing, because you're talking about what's going on for you in your body as you're even
Yes.
thinking about doing it.
Yep. Totally.
That's so important. So I'd love to hear from everyone about the approach you're trained in. And like, we're all learning it for the first time. Amanda, I would love for you to start. So tell us about eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Lots of people have heard EMDR.
Yes.
But tell us about it and how it works.
Yeah, I would say EMDR is one of the more well-known trauma modalities. It's probably been around the longest or the most well-known. It's appeared on TV shows.
Yes,
There's an
it
episode
has.
of Grey's Anatomy where one of the characters is doing EMDR, which is cool because clients can go kind of see from that perspective. So the underlying assumption in EMDR is that traumatic events are stored in our brains and bodies in such a way that they are kind of stuck and causing us distress, and that we need to change the way that they are that they're stored in our body and our nervous system. And so, and those events are associated with kind of, there's 4 things we talk about in EMDR: a picture, a thought, feeling, and sensation. So those are all things that go into that traumatic experience that we're focusing on in EMDR processing. And we're using something called bilateral stimulation, which, if you know about EMDR, you might have seen a therapist kind of waving their hands and the person's eyes following that, or a light bar. A lot of EMDR now is also done with tappers, where people hold these kind of like buzzers in their hand that also create bilateral stimulation. And based on kind of our nervous system and neurobiology, these eye movements or bilateral stimulation appear to help our brain reprocess the information and to store it differently. So it kind of is activating this emotional healing system that our body innately has. So the brain is really doing the healing, like we're allowing it to, and EMDR is just kind of a vehicle for that. I have an analogy that I use with a lot of clients.
I love analogies.
Yes, you do, girl.
So the analogy is, let's say that you walk into your bedroom and all of a sudden, like, somehow all of your clothes are out of the closet and they're out of the dresser and they're just strewn across your floor. That's not where they're supposed to be. And that is how the memories are currently being stored in your brain. They're in a place in your brain where it's kind of causing this mess, and it's maybe causing you distress or anxiety. Like, they're not where they're supposed to be. And so in the process of EMDR, we're putting the clothes back in the closet and back in the dresser where they're supposed to be stored in your brain.
Got it.
So that your brain is not, how they're stored now is that they're taking up more space than they should versus being integrated as part of your life experience. As you talk about this weaving of this kind of yarn, right now the traumatic experience is like the whole blanket versus just being, one thread of the yarn or a few threads of the yarn of the blanket.
Makes total sense. And okay, so Amy, accelerated resolution therapy is pretty similar to EMDR. There's a lot of like overlapping.
Yeah.
Tell us about it. So sometimes people call it ART, and if people were to look this up, we love acronyms in the therapy world. Everybody, there are thousands of them, but ART is one.
Yeah, it is really similar, but there are some differences. With ART, you're doing the eye movement, like with EMDR, but you're replacing the scene. So we talk about like the scene, so that trauma scene.
The image.
The image that comes to mind, okay?
And it's almost like on a film, like you're watching from start to finish. So when you're doing the eye movements, you're having somebody see their scene. And I know we'll go more into maybe more of the steps of each modality and what that might look like. But so it's a very visual. I can have someone come in doing these eye movements, going through scenes, going through kind of body scanning with the eye movements and stuff. But the big piece is that you don't even have to talk about your trauma. You're just in your head with it even. So there's times where I maybe with the client never know what their actual trauma was. Or it's a little rare. Most times people will want to talk about it and stuff, but sometimes they don't, and you can still do the work.
Yeah, which is kind of a huge difference between ART and EMDR, that verbalization. It is what comes to mind for you. And so if someone isn't wanting to share something out
If
loud.
it's too scary to talk about and has such a fear, or we're told that, never share, they can still process it.
Yeah. And I think the big difference with EMDR is there's a lot of, at least my understanding is ART, you're very focused on the image, and EMDR, you are focused on the image, but probably the bigger part of what you're focused on is that negative belief that person has developed about themselves, and that's kind of what you're wanting to change throughout the course of EMDR. So it might be a belief like I'm not good enough or I'm not safe, and we're working to shift that negative belief associated to the event, whereas my understanding is ART is more about shifting that image.
Shifting the image into it's like you're redirecting your scene. So you're actually changing your scene. So if you were attacked by a dog, and you're doing your trauma scene and going through that, and that can be really heavy, and you're trying, and you're talking maybe even to your therapist about it and stuff. But then the next part is to how do you redirect that scene? I'm just being really general here. ART folks will be texting, wait a minute.
Yeah, right.
Who's talking about ART? but I do think, it really is where you can then change it into these positive images so that it takes that distress away. And then if or the feeling about or seeing a dog again can pop up that positive image because you've actually changed the emotions with that. You're replacing it.
Yeah, Tara, tell us about brain spotting.
Brain spotting. So,
because some people maybe have not even heard of this term before.
So brain spotting is quite new, and some similarities between the others. But this utilizes eye positions to access and process emotional and physical pain, particularly related to trauma, but not necessarily trauma. One of the incredible things about brain spotting is that it can be used for gaining positive things. Like one of the things they've started using it for are athletes who are experiencing insecurities or blocks regarding their abilities, or with writers who are experiencing writer's block, or creators. But the main focus is trauma. And so it is based on the principle of where you look affects how you feel. And so it is identifying specific brain spots in the visual field. So going back to, using the eye movements, but by finding the brain spots in the visual field, it unlocks and you release stored emotion and physical sensations. So it is both the emotional piece and the somatic piece. And it's finding that pathway to our inner brain to heal that deep trauma. So essentially what you're doing, and we'll talk about it later when we talk about the actual sessions, what I love so much about it is the power really is within the client. And there are two types of things. There's inside window and outside window. And the client can choose. Are they going to have the power and do inside window and try and locate this brain spot on their own and take that control? Or are they going to use outside window and have me do it? Or we can find it together. And once they locate that, they can do the work using me as the support, and they can do it without even speaking to me.
Okay, so similar to ART too.
Yep. It is completely up to the client. The client could speak to me the entire time as they're processing their trauma. They could talk at times, or they can be completely silent the entire time. My job as the brain spotting technician or practitioner is to support them, particularly because we're observing their physical state and mental state. So we're there to provide support when we need it, but then also to be able to regulate if their physical state becomes too intense, and then to bring them back if needed.
So interesting.
It's just, I love it so much, and it's so fascinating.
And I'm trained in narrative exposure and written exposure therapies, and really the belief behind narrative. That is story. The word is story. So the thought is that we are a compilation of the stories and things we've experienced, and we have written those in our minds and in our bodies. And so these are modalities that are writing based. They seek to write and meaning make about trauma. And it's a storytelling and story sharing way of processing. So a person would attend a first session and we would talk through what the therapy involves. And then we would start with the development of something called a lifeline. That is our whole series, a timeline of events in someone's life, including traumatic circumstances. And then over the course of sessions, we process the sensory experience and get very detailed. We slow it way down and get very detailed about trauma and write details, including these sensory moments, in an ongoing narrative that can actually be its own book to read through at the end of treatment if we wanted to do it that way. Wow. And I've had sessions where we actually read back the entirety of the narrative. It can be a helpful modality for anyone who has had a series of traumas in their life. So if we're talking about many even different kinds of things or multiple traumatic experiences throughout their life.
Wow.
So that's narrative exposure therapy. And we've talked a little bit about, what it is. Tell us about what a session might be. Amanda, what's like a session of EMDR?
Well, that's a complicated question to answer because EMDR has 8 phases. And I think when people come in and they say they want to do EMDR, I think a lot of what they're talking about is phase 4, which is the reprocessing phase, which is the eye movement part. Okay. So in the first phase of therapy, you're really working on building rapport with your therapist. They're trying to understand your traumatic experiences, do history taking, and develop those resources. I keep using that word resource, but those are strategies to help you with the symptoms that are coming up around your trauma. So you might spend a lot of time actually in that first part before you even get to phase 4, where you're learning strategies. Once you are in phase 4, which is a lot of what people are talking about when they talk about EMDR, you come into session and it looks different for everyone, kind of depending on how much processing they can tolerate in a session. But we'll kind of have identified what's the traumatic memory that we're focusing on, what's the negative belief associated with that memory, and what are the emotions and sensations that come up as you think about that memory in my office. And then we will do the eye movements or the tappers, and you can, if you're using tappers, you can close your eyes. And then I'm just checking in kind of periodically with the person about kind of what's happening in their brain as this reprocessing part is happening. I'm checking in with them, asking them to take a deep breath to stay grounded throughout the session. And some people spend the majority of a reprocessing session doing the eye movements. And some people, because of the trauma or because of, internal things, spend a very small part of the session doing the eye movements. And then after that, we would engage in some of those resources together to help you feel grounded and safe upon leaving session.
Okay.
And then once you're kind of complete with the reprocessing, we'll do some other things. We'll kind of do what's called installation, which feels like a funny word to me. But that's where you're kind of focusing on that more positive belief or more neutral belief that you want to connect to that experience, scanning your body to make sure that we have released those sensations connected to it.
Got it.
And planning for any future circumstances that might be triggers and how you would handle those triggers.
Got it. And my guess is that every session could look a little different.
It typically does, yeah.
You might spend more time with one thing.
Yep.
And as we talked about at the beginning of this show even, there is a whole stage of therapy that is talking about it.
Totally.
So that's what you call resourcing. That
yes.
You're even talking about what it would feel like to process something and building some skills and tools, which I'm guessing is also part of ART.
Yeah, it is.
And what a session looks like.
And it's so interesting, right? Because every client's so different. Coming in, like, specifically for trauma work, you might have one client coming in like, I've got my image, I want to do this, I've read up on ART,
Yeah.
I'm okay with you, you're okay with me, okay, let's go. Because they're so ready to let go of these, images for the trauma event.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the usual client, coming in, you really develop that relationship first, you build that trust with client. That may take a session, or it might take 5, or depending on that client,
Yeah.
how scared they are, how ready they
Or
are
a year.
to do it.
Yeah.
Right? But when we get to the point where ART, it is similar. It's the first doing the eye movement, practicing, going through the body kind of scan, when I kind of see where there's stress in the body. Excuse me, and then going to talking about the scene. And so they'll do their scene with the eye movements, their trauma scene, and then going to repeat again that body sensation. Now, how did that feel? So, again, they don't have to tell me what that trauma is, specifics. They're not talking.
Got it.
It's just visualizing that scene as they're doing the eye movements. And when I stop, so let's say you do it one, first time. So then I'll say, are you still in the beginning, middle, or end? I maybe didn't get to the end yet. Okay, we're going to keep going.
Okay.
And then we'll do a check body. Then we'll try it again. Let's go back to that scene. Because you repeat, and there's less and less stress in the body as you go on. The repeating is such a big part of it.
Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much.
I know, it's so interesting. And then there's a whole nother where you can redirect your scene. That's the next kind of piece.
Wow.
Then there's the last part is, like, say if there's one image that's just, but it's still popping up, horrible trauma image. And then there's a way to erase that scene while doing eye movement. You pretend you're erasing. Wow. And you're going to choose a color, and then you paint over that image. And then you wallpaper over a different image that becomes there instead of that horrific trauma moment that it keeps flashing back. And all of a sudden, the next time they come in, now I'm popping up. I can maybe feel my anxiety again, my trauma.
Right.
But now it's my wallpaper.
But now it's the wallpaper.
Okay,
Amazing.
so with the going through a scene, because they're not talking, and you're having to figure out, like, are you in the middle or
It's
the end?
It's a counting of the eye movements. You do so many.
So
I get to my certain amount, the 40 back and forth eye movements. My hand going. I'm moving my hand.
I'm
we're
gonna start
radio.
reprocessing right now because I'm watching your hand.
And I forget we're radio, so I'm like moving my hand like people can see me.
but there's a video.
Well, but that feeling of that you're, I don't know if they're not talking. So I have to ask them, are you in the kind of middle, beginning, end of that?
Right. So question is, in one session, that's an hour or whatever it is for you, you could get through one scene once. Just depends on the client.
It depends on the client, because how much stress are with that keeping going back to the body sensations. Where are they at? Sometimes I just stay there.
Because they may process it very slowly, like their scene, where they may not even get to the end of their scene in one session.
Yeah. And then you keep in that place.
Okay.
Yeah, what about a session for you, Tara?
So
what would something typical look like?
Yeah, it's pretty prescribed. And so, again, like you had said, it is such a process of, but if we're going to get to like what most people want to know, like the good stuff, is they sit down and it's so relationship based. So by this time, like the person has to feel very comfortable with you. And we have... It's literally a teacher pointer, essentially, what our magic wand is. And it has a color at the end of it, and that is what is used as their focal point, and they will select what the end of it looks like. There's a series of that they can pick. And I sit in my chair. They get comfortable wherever they're at, and they choose inside or outside window if they're choosing or I'm choosing. And we look using an X and Y axis for that brain spot. And essentially what it is, and this is the part that just takes time and a little bit of a gift, I say, and it is reading the nonverbals of the person's body. And when we all think about it, we all know this if we really have the capacity to read people's nonverbals when they're identifying a brain spot. And so I will very slowly, like at this pace, will move the pointer, and that person is following it, and you are looking to locate a brain spot by watching their eyes. And it's a twitch. It's
something quite subtle.
A spot
Yeah.
where you notice that their eyes do something a little different, where that brain spot, that little tunnel down to their inner brain has been located. And then you do something to confirm it, and then that becomes their spot. And then they focus on the spot. Before that takes place, you do a check on, okay, do you have the thing you want to explore today? When you think of that, what emotion is felt, and where in your body do you feel that? That somatic piece. And then on a scale of 0 to 10, when you think of that and where you feel it, what intensity level, the goal, like Amy had just said, is, let's say that client says an 8. The goal over a course of time, very rare in one session, is to decrease it to 0 or 1. I always say it's kind of like mental exposure therapy. They're revisiting that trauma enough to where when they think of it, it doesn't mean that it's just cool and calm and like, oh, that happened, but that they have the coping skills and the ability to not be overcome with that sense of fear and anguish. It can still evoke emotion, but in a much more, they have the skills to deal with it. They go into their little moment with the object, focusing on it. They can do it with their eyes closed, eyes open. They can focus on the key to having that object is it's the safe place. A lot of times I will tell them, focus in on it first until you can hone in, and then do whatever you want. And from the client's experience, many of them do that and then kind of go to a place of you just let your brain take over. And
it kind of sounds like wacky science as I'm even listening,
it 100%
which
does.
actually is kind of like where all of us are coming from.
100%.
And they sound a little strange. And I hear that, listeners, you're probably sitting there going, what? And part of, but it does work. Evidence has showed on all of these different modalities. And I'm thinking about what ties all of us together is this idea of the role of partnership in therapist and client through this whole therapy. That even with narrative exposure therapy, it's a lot of verbal. So that's one huge difference. It's a lot of sharing and going into specific sensory detail of how we remember something or how we're experiencing something, even as we're talking about it. And then I actually transcribe that and create after the session a narrative of what was talked about in the session, send it to the client, and then we talk about meaning making or how they are changed by the trauma that they've experienced. But that therapist is really partner in this process.
Absolutely.
And healing does come really big bias, listeners, from, in my perspective, big bias here. The healing comes not only from the modality itself, but literally from that witness of the partnership of the therapist. And you talked about safety and security, Tara, that how important that is, that feeling safe in the session, which means that by itself is healing. That by itself is part of the therapy. Regardless of the specific modality that people are undergoing. And I would love to hear, just as we end today, because we've only been able to not even tap the surface of the iceberg of each of these modalities, because we train for a long time in these. These are big commitments on the sides of therapists. How have you seen it heal? How have you seen it impact? And would love for you to just share briefly, even as I said that, listeners, I said the word, and everyone in this room, I could tell, went to a place where they had an image that they pictured, and everybody got a smile on their faces. So, Amanda, how have you seen it heal?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a client that I worked with who had some pretty, more of the images was kind of what they were wanting to use EMDR for. and how the images had kind of impacted how they had felt about themselves, and how these images were just popping up in the middle of their day and like impacting their ability to like do their job and things like that. And through doing EMDR processing, like stopped having these kind of disruptive images and decrease the amount in ways in which that those symptoms were causing them distress throughout their day, and able to work better and not be disrupted in their relationships. So it was incredible.
That's incredible. Amy, what about you?
You know, because it hit me when you said that, like bearing witness, you know, like being in that room with clients through their trauma. And that energy, and maybe it's with the eye movements, and I'm pretty soon tuned in on that too, as I'm doing it with them, and I know, and they're not even telling me what it is, but you see in their face, and the heavy, you know, stress and crying, and you get through that session, and then, you know, you're on that journey with them.
Right.
This is a place to release this. We're here together.
Right. Well, and especially for people who have trauma in the context of relationships, to have a place where they feel safe, like Becky was saying, and maybe they've never had a place where they felt safe to do this work before.
Right, the trust.
And how huge that can be. And actually, you know, research actually shows that the relationship is as equal, if not more importance than the intervention. So as much as I love all these interventions, what I do love more is this idea of the container and the space that we create for people as therapists.
What's in between.
What would you say, Tara? How have you seen healing?
Oh,
with brainspotting.
I'm just so caught up in their stories. The idea of particular ones just who have been victims of things and being witness to their story, and they are not even saying words, but just watching their story unfold on their faces, and them trusting me to be on their journey with them is very different than hearing a story, because you're watching them experience it, and the level of trust and vulnerability you're witnessing is so profound. It's impossible to not be impacted by it. And then to bear witness to the coping skills they develop and they walk away stronger human beings is just like, and that we get to do that.
Yeah. Greatest honor. Well, I think about so much of trauma. We talked about this in Fears and Apprehensions around processing. So much of trauma is compartmentalizing it, seeking to compartmentalize it because we want to try to keep it. We worry that if we don't contain it, it will get worse or it will impact other areas of life. And that from a narrative exposure space, we become a series of compartmentalized moments then. And I witness this healing. I've seen healing when we get to move from compartmentalization to integration, where we become more than a series of finite moments, and we become one entire, in my line of practice, it's one entire narrative that flows into another. And you talk about it, Amanda, that impacts, we've seen it in relationships then, that when we can actually integrate what has occurred in our lives and understand it from a space of how this has impacted really our totality. Yeah. What that does to be able to integrate our sense of self. It's like the coolest thing. And even as I'm talking, Tara's like, you know, her head is sideways.
I just love it so much. It is. And the fact that we get to keep learning. I'm getting trained in phase 2 in December. Like, your learning doesn't have to stop. Like, we just keep, we're on this quest for just more, and it's amazing. Like, it's...
Well, and partly healed, it isn't necessarily past tense. Healing is an ongoing process. So a framework of... we
get to do this.
Yes, and that there isn't necessarily a moment in trauma processing that you're like, oh, that's done. Yeah. Because we are always becoming as human beings, too, and we get to partner with that. This has been an incredible discussion. So much to think about here. We're going to head to a commercial break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk through our listener questions that are really around these specific trauma modalities and wondering about how people might make decisions about them. Feels Out Loud will process your questions and thoughts in just a moment.
You gotta find the people. Express yourself.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this part of the show is where we talk through questions from you, our beautiful listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics for each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly, or email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. Of course, follow us on social media as well. We really do want to hear from you and what you are wondering about.
And everybody who's listening, you sent us quite a few questions about trauma modalities. You're wondering a lot of things, and we just scratched the surface, as I said in the last segment. There's so many differences and similarities between these modalities. Keep asking the questions. We will keep having the shows on these because we know that there are a lot of questions. The question we chose for today is, how can I decide which trauma processing therapy is best for me? Big question, person. And we did, Terry, you said it beautifully at the beginning of the show today, that maybe or it was last week, I think, consider the uniqueness of you. But I'd love to hear from people. What would you say? How can they decide what trauma processing is best for them?
Well, I think, we did touch the surface today, and I think kind of reflecting on what you heard today, did anything specifically that any of us shared kind of resonate as fitting with the uniqueness of who you are?
Yeah.
And, the internet's great. You can use it to do some research, but, just make sure that you're finding reputable sources that seem reputable in terms of how they're talking about these modalities. I think you could definitely also schedule a session with a therapist who has any type of trauma training. And oftentimes people come in telling me that they want EMDR, and through talking with them, I'm like, I actually think ART might be better for you, or brainspotting might be better for you. And so if you schedule a consultation, or a lot of therapists offer consultation calls, for 15 minutes for free, or that initial session, and to kind of sift through if they would have recommendations for you on what a modality might be based on what you're able to share with them.
I think that's great advice. I also think, as you were listening to our descriptions of things, am I a talker? Do I not want to? Because that's going to eliminate some choices. For example, with brain spotting, it's you having that ownership of like, it's seeking out that brain spot. Versus, different than, with Amanda, with EMDR, like you're holding different things. That's a different sense of that, I wouldn't have to find something, where each one, like there are the little differences. Where your comfort level might be different. You may have heard mine going, I don't know how I'd do that.
And with ART, I was thinking, if you're not wanting to share it, but you're wanting to do the work, ART might be a good fit.
Right.
And that way too. But I do think, like you're saying, Amanda, to be able to talk to a therapist, or sometimes even the bigger clinic, or even our small group, but there's an intake person, a coordinator that you can call or ask. Hey, this is kind of the work or goals I have. Who would be a good fit for me? And they can help you talk through. But for sure, have a therapist being able to consult, before you start therapy too.
And great point, Amy. Seeking out a clinic that might have people trained in multiple modalities, because a clinician is going to sit with you and talk through your specific experiences and what kind of processing might be helpful for you. That's part of the assessment that we're doing. And in a clinic where multiple people are there and trained in different modalities, such as where we work, we give referrals to each other all the time in saying, I think this might be more of a benefit for you, or this might help with what you're saying. And great point, Tara, on, are you a person who likes music? Are you a person who already loves imagery? Are you a writer?
Yes.
Think about some of those things that are part of you already, because these modalities may have that a part of it, and that might really resonate with you. We're already at the end of our show today. Oh my gosh. Thank you for listening this morning, everyone. Join us next week as we talk through the book The Comfort Crisis with special guest Sean Burgeth. And in the week ahead, be kind to yourself, everyone. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
I wanna feel just a little